I have attended a great many charity events in my life. Too many, if I am being honest. The rubber chicken, the auction paddles, the speeches that go 4 minutes past their natural end. When you spend 40 years on the wards of a hospital and another 9 as a trustee, a charitable foundation, these evenings become something you endure with good grace rather than anticipate with pleasure. You smile at the right moments. You bid generously on something you do not need. You hold your glass of warm white wine, and you remind yourself that the money goes somewhere that matters. I tell you this so that you understand what I mean when I say I was not expecting anything that October evening to be different. The Sanderson Wing atrium had been 3 years in the making and £4 million in the asking, and the foundation had finally completed it. The unveiling gala was held on a Thursday, which struck me as an odd choice. A Thursday has no ceremony to it, but the date had been fixed around Sir Gerald Carew's diary, and Sir Gerald Carew's diary apparently did not include Fridays. He had donated the piano, that is to say, a Steinway Model B had been placed on a low dais at the far end of the new atrium, and a small brass plate on its lid read, "In generous memory of the Carew family's commitment to the healing arts." Sir Gerald had written the inscription himself, as he had written most things connected to his gift. I was standing near the back of the room. 40 or so guests, most of them donors, a handful of senior staff in their best clothes, 2 or 3 consultants I recognized from the old cardiac unit. When I first noticed Leonard Moss, he was standing near the service corridor entrance, holding a cloth folded over one forearm, the way a porter does when he has finished one task and is waiting quietly for the next. He was wearing the pale blue uniform of the domestic services team, the one with the small hospital trust logo above the breast pocket, and he was watching the room with the particular stillness of a man who has been invisible in public places for a very long time and has made his peace with it. I had seen him before, in the way that you see people in a hospital when they are part of the fabric of the place, wheeling equipment along the corridor at 6 in the morning, holding a lift door open, saying good evening to the night nurses. He was perhaps 65 or 66, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and very large, very quiet hands. Sir Gerald Carew was speaking. He had been speaking for some minutes. He spoke about the transformative power of the arts within the healing environment, which was a phrase I suspected he had borrowed from the brochure. He spoke about the importance of culture in the modern hospital. He spoke at some length about the piano itself, its provenance, its tonal qualities, its exceptional action. He was a man who wore his philanthropy like a suit of armor, polished to a high shine and slightly too large for him, and he carried it with the careful pride of someone who had paid rather a lot for the fitting. When he had finished, he swept his arm toward the Steinway and invited any of his guests who played to come forward and inaugurate the instrument. There was the usual hesitation. A woman near the front said she hadn't touched a piano in years. A gentleman beside her attempted a few bars of something and stopped with the self-deprecating laugh that people use when they want you to know they are better than they are demonstrating. 2 or 3 others declined with a hand gesture. It was at this point that Sir Gerald noticed Leonard Moss. I do not know whether it was the uniform that attracted his eye, or the cloth folded over the arm, or simply the fact that Leonard was standing at the edge of the room in a way that made him visible once you were looking for someone to address. Sir Gerald extended one large gold cuff-linked hand in Leonard's direction. "What about the staff?" he said, with the expansive warmth of a man who has decided in this moment to be the kind of philanthropist who includes the little people. "Come on, then. Give us a cheerful tune, something simple the staff can enjoy. The piano's for the whole hospital, after all." There was a ripple of good-natured laughter from the guests nearest him. Not unkind, particularly. The kind of laughter that agrees with whoever is speaking, without quite knowing what it is agreeing with. Leonard looked at Sir Gerald for a moment. Then he looked at the piano. He crossed the room. I noticed that he handed the cloth to a younger porter who was standing nearby. I passed it without looking, the way you pass something when your hands know they are about to be needed for something else. He did not hurry. He walked with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has long ago stopped explaining himself, and he sat down at the Steinway the way a person sits down in a chair they have been missing for a very long time. Without performance, without ceremony, with simply a settling. He adjusted the bench by perhaps 2 inches. He placed his hands in his lap. Then he lifted them to the keys. The first note of Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor is not a dramatic note. It does not announce itself. It arrives the way dusk arrives, gradually, and then all at once, a low, measured pulse in the left hand, steady as a heartbeat, while the right hand lifts something above it, something that is barely a melody at first, barely more than a thought reaching for a shape. It is music that asks nothing of you in the first few bars except to be still. The conversations nearest the piano stopped within the opening phrase. I watched it happen the way you watch a tide come in. One cluster of guests near the dais fell quiet, first, then turned. Then the group behind them, one person at a time, as they were being tapped gently on the shoulder by something they had not expected. A woman in a green dress, I do not know who she was, put her hand to her mouth before the first section had even completed. Not dramatically, just a hand rising to her mouth, the way it does when something arrives, before you have had a chance to prepare yourself for it. Sir Gerald Carew was still smiling. But it had become the smile of a man who has realized he is somewhere other than where he thought he was, and has not yet decided what to do about it. Leonard played. What I can tell you is this: there is playing, and then there is playing. Most of us who have sat at a piano in our lives have produced notes, sequences, melodies. We have reproduced something that was written down somewhere, and done it with varying degrees of accuracy and feeling. What Leonard Moss did with that Steinway was something of a different order entirely. The Nocturne in B-flat minor is not a long piece, perhaps 6 minutes, perhaps 7, but it contains within it the full range of what a human being can hold without breaking. The left hand kept that slow, rocking pulse, steady and unwavering, the way grief is steady and unwavering once you have carried it long enough. The right hand moved above it with a freedom that should not have been possible for hands that had not played publicly in 25 years. The melody curved and breathed and pulled back and swelled again, each phrase shaped with a precision that was never cold. Always controlled, but never cold. The way a man speaks about someone he loved when he has had long enough to trust himself to speak. There is a passage in the Nocturne's middle section where the music rises out of its own stillness without warning. The left hand undisturbed, the right suddenly climbing, pressing into something urgent and unresolved, before settling back as if the outburst had been admitted and then quietly withdrawn. Leonard did not rush that passage, and he did not shy from it. He went into it the way you go into the hardest thing, with your eyes ends open, at walking pace. And then he brought it back down, phrase by careful phrase, until the opening stillness returned and held. He did not play to us. That was the thing I kept returning to afterward, trying to find the words for it. He was not performing. He was simply playing. Playing the way a person prays when there is no one watching, because the act itself is the point, because the music goes somewhere whether or not there is a room full of people to witness it. We were incidental to what was happening at that piano, and somehow that made it more, not less. The room was entirely silent by the second page. I am 71 years old. I have sat in concert halls. I have heard recordings that cost studios considerable sums of money to produce. I have, in the course of a long life, been moved by music in the ordinary ways that people are moved. What happened to me standing at the back of that atrium, in my good charity trustee's shoes, holding a glass of wine I had entirely forgotten was in my hand, was not the ordinary kind. It was not the technique. Or rather, it was the technique, but it was more than the technique. It was what was underneath the technique, what had been loaded into each phrase over 25 years of silence, what a person carries when they stop playing and start pushing trolleys down hospital corridors and holding lift doors, open for strangers at 6 in the morning. All of it was in the music, every bit of it. A man near the center of the room, one of the cardiac consultants, a composed and rather unsentimental man by my experience, took off his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. I did not look at Sir Gerald Carew. I did not need to. The Nocturne draws toward its close with a quality that is not resolution exactly, but something like acceptance. The melody settling, the pulse of the left hand slowing almost imperceptibly, the final chords arriving with the quietness of something that has said what it needed to say and is now content to be still. Leonard played the ending the way it must be played, without hurry, without sentiment, without any bid for effect. He simply let it end. The last chord faded. He lifted his hands from the keys. He placed them in his lap and the room was silent, not the polite, uncertain silence of an audience that is not sure whether a piece is finished. A different silence entirely. The kind that means everyone in the room has forgotten for a moment that there are other people in the room. It held for perhaps 8 seconds, perhaps 10. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, somewhere near the back. I suspect it may have been mine, though I could not afterwards say with certainty. And the room came apart all at once, and a great many people were on their feet, and a woman near the front was not troubling to hide that she was crying, and the cardiac consultant had replaced his glasses and was applauding with the quiet intensity of a man settling a debt. Leonard Moss did not stand. He inclined his head, once slightly, in the direction of the room, which was both a thank you and a full stop, and then he rose from the bench and reached for the cloth that the younger porter was still holding at the edge of the room, and he folded it back over his forearm. And he returned to the service corridor entrance, and he stood there again in his blue uniform, with the small trust logo above his breast pocket, the same as he had before. I learned the rest of it later, from the matron of the oncology ward, who had worked alongside Leonard for 11 years and knew him better than most. She told me that he had trained at the Royal Northern Conservatoire in the late 1970s, that he had given recitals, that there had been, at one point, a recording, a small label, not widely distributed, a disc of nocturnes and impromptus that had received a notice in one of the music journals, that his wife had died in the Sanderson Hospital in the winter of 1999, the old building, before the wing was rebuilt, in the oncology ward, where he now wheeled the equipment and held the lift doors, and that he had applied for his post the following spring and had been here ever since. She told me that in 11 years, she had never once heard him mention the piano. I think about Leonard Moss on quiet evenings, when the ward reports are filed and the trustee minutes are signed, and the building is doing its slow, necessary work in the dark. I think about what it costs a person to carry something that large for that long, and what it means when, for 6 minutes, in a new atrium on a Thursday evening, because a man in gold cufflinks waved him toward a piano and asked him to play something cheerful. The thing that has been carried is finally, briefly, set down. I do not think the music went nowhere. I think it went exactly where it needed to go.